This is part 29 of Good Omens. Over the years, a huge number of theological man-hours have been spent debating the famous question, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? In order to arrive at an answer, the following facts must be taken into consideration. Firstly, angels simply don't dance. It's one of the distinguishing characteristics that mark an angel. They may listen appreciatively to the music of the spheres, but they don't feel the urge to get down and boogie to it. So, none. At least nearly none. Aziraphale had learned to gavotte in a discreet gentleman's club in Portland Place in the late 1880s, and while he had initially taken to it like a duck to merchant baking, after a while he had become quite good at it, and was quite put out when, some decades later, the gavotte went out of style for good. So, providing the dance was a gavotte, and providing that he had a suitable partner, also able for the sake of argument both to gavotte and to dance it on the head of a pin, the answer is straightforward, 1. Then again, you might as well ask how many demons can dance on the head of a pin. They're of the same original stock after all. At least they dance, although it's not what you and I would call dancing. Not good dancing anyway. A demon moves like a white band on Soul Train. And if you put it that way, the answer is quite a lot actually, providing they abandon their physical bodies, which is a picnic for a demon. Demons aren't bound by physics. If you take the long view, the universe is just something small and round, like those water-filled balls which produce a miniature snowstorm when you shake them. Although unless the ineffable plan is a lot more ineffable than it's given credit for, it does not have a giant plastic snowman at the bottom. But if you look from really close up, the only problem about dancing on the head of a pin is all those big gaps between electrons. For those of angel stock or demon breed, size and shape and composition are simply options. Crowley is currently traveling incredibly fast down a telephone line. Ring. Crowley went through 2 telephone exchanges at a very respectable fraction of light speed. Hosta was a little way behind him, 4 or 5 inches, but at that size it gave Crowley a very comfortable lead. One that would vanish, of course, when he came out the other end. They were too small for sound, but demons don't necessarily need sound to communicate. He could hear Hosta screaming behind him, "You bastard! I'll get you! You can't escape me!" Ring. "Wherever you come out, I'll come out too! You won't get away!" Crowley had traveled through over 20 miles of cable in less than a second. Hosta was close behind him. Crowley was going to have to time this whole thing very, very carefully. Ring. That was the 3rd ring. Well, thought Crowley, here goes nothing. He stopped suddenly and watched Hosta shoot past him. Hosta turned in. Ring. Crowley shot through the telephone line, zapped through the plastic sheeting, and materialized full-size and out of breath in his lounge. Click. The outgoing message tape began to turn on his insouciphone. Then there was a beep, and as the incoming message tape turned, a voice from the speaker screamed after the beep. "Right? What? You bloody snake!" The little red message light began to flash, on and off, like a tiny red angry eye. Crowley really wished he had some more holy water and the time to hold the cassette in it until it dissolved. But getting hold of Liger's terminal bath had been dangerous enough. He'd had it for years just in case, and even its presence in the room made him uneasy. Or maybe, yes, what would happen if he put the cassette in the car? He could play Hosta over and over until he turned into Freddie Mercury. No, he might be a bastard, but you can only go so far. There was a rumble of distant thunder. He had no time to spare. He had nowhere to go. He went anyway. He ran down to his Bentley and drove towards the West End as if all the demons of hell were after him, which was more or less the case. Madame Tracy heard Mr. Shadwell's slow tread come up the stairs. It was slower than usual and paused every few steps. Normally he came up the stairs as if he hated every one of them. She opened her door. He was leaning against the landing wall. "Why, Mr. Shadwell," she said, "whatever have you done to your hand?" "Get away from me, woman," Shadwell groaned. I didn't know my own powers." "Why are you holding it out like that?" Shadwell tried to back into the wall. "Stand back, Italy. I can be responsible." "What on earth had happened to you, Mr. Shadwell?" said Madame Tracy, trying to take his hand. "Nothing on earth, nothing on earth." She managed to grab his arm. He, Shadwell, Scrooge of evil, was powerless to resist being drawn into her flat. He'd never been in it before, at least in his waking moments. His dreams had furnished it in silk, rich hangings, and what he thought of as scented ungulants. Admittedly, it did have the bead curtain in the entrance to the kitchenette, and a lamp made rather inexpertly from a Chianti bottle, because Madame Tracy's apprehension of what was chic, like Aziraphale's, had grounded around 1953. And there was a table in the middle of the room with a velvet cloth on it, and on the cloth the crystal ball, which increasingly was Madame Tracy's means of earning a living. "I think you could do well with a good lie down, Mr. Shadwell," she said in a voice that brooked no argument, and led him on into the bedroom. He was too bewildered to protest. "But young Newt is out there," Shadwell muttered, "enthralled to heathen passions and occult wiles." "Then I'm sure he'll know what to do about them," said Madame Tracy briskly, whose mental picture of what Newt was going through was probably much closer to reality than was Shadwell's. "And I'm sure he wouldn't like to think of you getting yourself worked up into a state here. You just lie down and I'll make us both a nice cup of tea." She disappeared in a clacking of bead curtains. Suddenly Shadwell was alone on what he was just capable of recalling, through the wreckage of his shattered nerves, was a bed of sin, and right at this moment was incapable of deciding whether that was in fact better or worse than not being alone on a bed of sin. He turned his head to take in his surroundings. Madame Tracy's concepts of what was erotic stemmed from the days when young men grew up thinking that women had beach balls affixed firmly in front of their anatomy. Bridget Bardot could be called a sex kitten without anyone bursting out laughing, and there really were magazines with names like Girls, Giggles, and Garters. Somewhere in this cauldron of perversiveness, she had picked up the idea that soft toys in the bedroom created an intimate, coitus air. Shadwell stared at some time at the large threadbare teddy bear, which had one missing eye and a torn ear. It probably had a name like Mr. Buggins. He turned his head the other way. His gaze was blocked by a pajama case shaped like an animal that may have been a dog, but there again might have been a skunk. It had a cheery grin. "Erg," he said, but recollection kept storming back. He really had done it. No one else in the army had ever exorcised a demon as far as he knew. Not Hopkins, not Stiftings, not Diceman. Probably not even Witchfinder Company Sergeant Major Narker. W.A. enjoyed a renaissance during the great days of Empire expansionism. The British Army's endless skirmishes frequently brought it up against witch doctors, bone pointers, shamans, and other occult adversaries. This was the cue for the deployment of the likes of W.A. CSM Narker, whose striding, bellowing 6'6", 18-stone figure, clutching an armor-plated book, 8-pound bell, and specifically reinforced candle, could clear the veldt of adversaries faster than a gasoline gun. Cecil Rhodes wrote of him, "Some remote tribes consider him to be a kind of god, and it is extremely brave or foolhardily witch doctor who will stand his ground with CSM Narker bearing down on him. I would rather have this man on my side than 2 battalions of Gurkhas." Probably not even Witchfinder Company Sergeant Major Narker, who held the all-time record for most witches found. Sooner or later, every army runs across its ultimate weapon, and now it existed, Shadwell reflected on the end of his arm. Well, screw no first use. He'd have a bit of a rest, seeing as he was here, and then the powers of darkness had met their match at last. Madame Tracy brought the tea in as he was snoring. She tactfully closed the door, and rather thankfully as well, because she had a seance due in 20 minutes, and it was no good turning down money these days. Although Madame Tracy was by many yardsticks quite stupid, she had an instinct in certain matters, and when it came to dabbling in the occult, her reasoning was faultless. Dabbling, she'd realized, was exactly what her customers wanted. They didn't want to be shoved it up to their necks. They didn't want the multiplanar mysteries of time and space. They just wanted to be reassured that Mother was getting along fine now she was dead. They wanted just enough for Colt to season the simple fare of their lives, and probably in portions no longer than 45 minutes, followed by tea and biscuits. They certainly didn't want odd candles, scents, chants, or mystic runes. Madame Tracy had even removed most of the major arcana from her tarot card pack, because their appearance tended to upset people. And she made sure that she had always put sprouts on to boil just before a seance. Nothing is more reassuring, nothing is more true to the comfortable spirit of English occultism than the smell of Brussels sprouts cooking in the next room. It was early afternoon, and the heavy storm clouds had turned the sky the color of old lead. It would rain soon, heavily, blinding. The firemen hoped the rain would come soon. The sooner the better. They'd arrived fairly promptly, and the younger firemen were dashing around excitedly, unrolling their hosepipe and flexing their axes. The older firemen knew at a glance that the building was a dead loss, and weren't even sure that the rain would stop it spreading to neighboring buildings, when a black Bentley skidded around the corner and drove up the pavement at a speed somewhere in excess of 60 miles per hour, and stopped with a screech of brakes half an inch away from the wall of the bookshop. An extremely agitated young man in dark glasses got out and ran towards the door of the blazing bookshop. He was intercepted by a fireman. "Are you the owner of this establishment?" asked the fireman. "Don't be stupid. Do I look like I run a bookshop?" "I really wouldn't know about that, sir. Appearances can be very deceptive. For example, I am a fireman. However, upon meeting me socially, people unaware of my occupation often suppose that I am, in fact, a chartered accountant or company director. Imagine me out of uniform, sir, and what kind of man would you see before you? Honestly." "A prat," said Crowley, and he ran into the bookshop. This sounds easier than it actually was, since in order to manage it, Crowley needed to avoid half a dozen firemen, 2 policemen, and a number of interesting Soho night people out early and arguing heatedly amongst themselves about which particular section of society had brightened up the afternoon and why. In any place than Soho, it is quite possible that spectators at a fire might have been interested. Crowley pushed straight through them. They scarcely spared him a glance. Then he pushed open the door and stepped into an inferno. The whole bookshop was ablaze. "Aziraphale!" he called. "Aziraphale! You stupid Aziraphale! Are you here?" No answer, just the crackle of burning paper, the splintering of glass as the fire reached the upstairs room, the crash of collapsing timbers. He scanned the shop urgently, desperately, looking for the angel, looking for help. In the far corner, a bookshelf toppled over, cascading flaming books across the floor. The fire was all around him, and Crowley ignored it. His left trouser leg began to smolder. He stopped it with a glance. "Hello, Aziraphale! For somebody's sake, Aziraphale!" The shop window was smashed from outside. Crowley turned, startled, and an unexpected jet of water struck him full in the chest, knocking him to the ground. His shades flew to a corner of the room and became a puddle of burning plastic. Yellow eyes with slitted vertical pupils were revealed. Wet and steaming, face ash blackened. As far from cool as it was possible for him to be, on all fours in the blazing bookshop, Crowley cursed Aziraphale and the inevitable plan, and above and below. Then he looked down and saw it. The book that the girl had left in the car in Tadfield on Wednesday night. It was slightly scorched around the cover, but miraculously unharmed. He picked it up, stuffed it into his jacket pocket, stood up unsteadily, and brushed himself off. The floor above him collapsed. With a roar and gargantuan shrug, the building fell in on itself, and in a rain of brick and timber and flaming debris. Outside, the passer-by were being herded back by the police, and a fireman was explaining to anyone who would listen. "I couldn't stop him. He must have been mad, or drunk. Just ran in. I couldn't stop him. Mad. Ran straight in. Horrible way to die. Horrible. Horrible. Just ran straight in." Then Crowley came out of the flames. The police and the firemen looked at him, saw the expression on his face, and stayed exactly where they were. He climbed into the Bentley and reversed back into the road, swung around a fire truck, into Wardour Street, and into the darkening afternoon. They stared at the cars that sped away. Finally, one of the policemen spoke. "Weather like this, he ought to have put his lights on," he said numbly. Especially driving like that could be dangerous, agreed another in flat, dead tones, and they all stood there in the light and the heat of the burning bookshop, wondering what was happening to a world that they had thought they understood. There was a flash of lightning, blue-white strobing across the cloud-black sky, a crack of thunder so loud it hurt, and a hard rain began to fall. She rode a red motorbike, not a friendly Honda red, a deep, bloody red, rich and dark and hateful. The bike was apparently, in every other respect, ordinary, except for the sword resting in its scabbard next set onto the side of the bike. Her helmet was crimson, and her leather jacket was the color of old wine. In ruby studs on the back were picked out the words, Hell's Angels. It was 1:10 on the afternoon, and it was dark and humid and wet. The motorway was almost deserted, and the woman in red roared down the road on her red motorbike, smiling lazily. It had been a good day so far. There was something about the sight of a beautiful woman on a powerful motorbike with a sword stuck on the back that had a powerful effect on a certain type of man. So far, 4 traveling salesmen had tried to race her, and bits of Ford Sierra now decorated the crash barriers and bridge supports along 40 miles of motorway. She pulled up to a service area and went into the Happy Porker Cafe. It was almost empty. A bored waitress was darning a sock behind the counter, and a knot of black-leathered bikers, hard, hairy, filthy, and huge, were clustered around an even taller individual in a black coat. He was resolutely playing something that in bygone years would have been a fruit machine, but now had a video screen and advised itself as trivia Scrabble. The audience were saying things like, "It's D, press D. The Godfather must have gotten more Oscars than Gone in the Wind. Puppet on a String, Sandy Shaw, honestly, I'm bleeding positive. 1666. No, you great pillock, that was the fire. The plague was 1665. It's B. The Great Wall of China wasn't one of the 7 wonders of the world." There were 4 options: pop music, sport, current events, and general knowledge. The tall biker who had kept his helmet on was pressing the buttons to all intents and purposes, oblivious of his supporters. At any rate, he was consistently winning. The red rider went over to the counter. "A cup of tea, please, and a cheese sandwich," she said. On your own, then, dear?" asked the waitress, passing the tea and something white and dry and hard across the counter. "Waiting for friends." "Ah," she said, biting through some wool. "Well, you're better off waiting here. It's hell out there." "No," she told her, "not yet." She picked a window table with a good view of the parking lot, and she waited. She could hear the trivia Scrabblers in the background. "That's a new one. How many times has England been officially at war with France since 1066? 20? Nay, is never 20. Oh, it was. Well, I never. American war with Mexico. I know that. It's June 1845. D. See, I told you." A second shortest biker, Big Pig Bong, 6'3", whispered to the shortest Greaser, 6'2". What happened to sport, then? He had love tattooed on one of his knuckles, hate on the other. "It's random, was it? Selection in it? I mean, they do it with microchips. It's probably got like millions of different subjects in there. And it's RAM." He had fish across his right knuckles and chip on the left. "Pop music, current events, general knowledge, and war. It's just I've never seen war before. That's why I mentioned it." Pig Bong cracked his knuckles loudly and pulled the ring tab on a can of beer. He swigged back half a can, belched curiously, then sighed. "I just wish they'd do more bleeding Bible questions." Why? Greaser never thought of Ping Bog as being a Bible trivia freak. "'Cause, well, you remember that bit of bother in Brighton?" "Oh, yeah, you was on Crime Watch," said Greaser with a trace of envy. "Well, I had to hang out in the hotel where my mom worked, didn't? 3 months, and nothing to read, only this bugger Gideon had left his Bible behind. It kind of sticks in your mind." Another motorbike, jet black and gleaming, drew up in the car park outside. The door to the cafe opened. A blast of cold wind blew through the room. A man dressed all in black leather, with a short black beard, walked over to the table, sat next to the woman in red, and the bikers around the video Scrabble machine suddenly noticed how hungry they all were, and deputed Scuzz to go and get them something to eat. All of them except the player, who said nothing, just pressed the buttons for the right answers and let his winnings accumulate in the tray at the bottom of the machine. "I haven't seen you since Moth King," said Red. "How's it been going?" "I've been keeping pretty busy," said Black. "Spent a lot of time in America. Brief world tours. Just killing time, really." "What do you mean you've got no steak and kidney pies?" asked Scuzz, affronted. "I thought we had some, but we don't," said the woman. "Feels funny, all of us getting together like this," said Red. "Funny? Well, you know, when you've spent all these thousands of years waiting for the big day and it finally comes, like waiting for Christmas or birthdays." "We don't have birthdays." "I didn't say we do, I just said that was what it was like." "Actually," admitted the woman, "it doesn't look like we've got anything left at all, except that slice of pizza." "Has it got any anchovies on it?" asked Scuzz gloomily. None of the chapter liked anchovies or olives. "Yes, dear, it's anchovies and olives. Would you like it?" Scuzz shook his head sadly. Stomach rumbling, he made his way back to the game. Big Ted got irritable when he got hungry, and when Big Ted got irritable, everyone got a slice. A new category had come up on the video screen. You could now answer questions about pop music, current events, famine, or war. The bikers seemed marginally less informed about the Irish potato famine of 1846 and the English everything famine of 1315 and the 1969 dope famine in San Francisco than they had been about war, but the player was still racking up a perfect score, punctuated occasionally by a war ratchet and chink as the machine disgorged pound coins into its tray. "Weather looks a bit tricky down south," said Red. Black squinted at the darkening clouds. "No, looks fine to me. We'll have a thunderstorm along any minute." Red looked at her nails. "That's good. It wouldn't be the same if we didn't have a good thunderstorm. Any idea how far we've got to ride?" Black shrugged. "A few 100 miles." "I thought it'd be longer somehow. All that waiting, just for a few 100 miles?" "It's not the traveling," said Black. "It's the arriving that matters." There was a roar outside. It was the roar of a motorbike with a defective exhaust, untuned engine, leaky carburetor. You didn't have to see the bike to imagine the clouds of black smoke it traveled in, the oil slicks it left in its wake, the trail of small motorbike parts and fittings that littered the roads behind it. Black went up to the counter. "4 teas, please." "4 teas, please," he said. "1 black." The cafe door opened. A young man in dusty white leathers entered, and the wind blew empty crisp packets and newspapers and ice cream wrappings in with him. They danced around his feet like excited children, then fell, exhausted, to the floor. "4 of you, are there, dear?" asked the woman. She was trying to find some clean cups and teaspoons. The entire rack seemed suddenly to have been coated in a light film of motor oil and dried egg. "There will be," said the man in black, and he took the teas and went back to the table, where his 2 comrades waited. "Any sign of him?" said the boy in white. They shook their heads. An argument had broken around the video screen. Current categories showing on the screen were war, famine, pollution, and pop trivia, 1962 to 1979. "Elvis Presley? It's gotta be C. It was in 1977 he snuffed it, wasn't it?" "Nah, D. 1976, I'm positive." "Yeah, same year as Bing Crosby. And Mark Bolan. He was dead good. Press D then. Go on." The tall figure made no motion to press any of the buttons. "What's the matter with you?" said Big Ted irritably. "Go on, press D. Elvis Presley died in 1976. "I don't care what it says," said the tall biker in the helmet. "I never laid a finger on him." The 3 people at the table turned as one. Red spoke. "When did you get here?" she asked. The tall man walked over the table, leaving the astonished bikers and his winnings behind him. "I never went away," he said, and his voice was a dark echo from the night places, a cold slab of sound, gray and dead. If that voice was a stone, it would have had words chiseled on it for a long time ago, a name and 2 dates. "Your tea's getting cold, my lord," said Famine. "It's been a long time," said War. There was a flash of lightning, almost immediately followed by a low rumble of thunder. "Lovely weather for it," said Pollution. "Yes." The bikers around the game were getting progressively baffled by its exchange. Led by Big Ted, they shambled over the table and stared at the 4 strangers. It did not escape their notice that all four strangers had Hell's Angels on their jacket, and they looked dead dodgy as far as the angels were concerned. Too clean for a start, and none of the four looked like they'd ever broken anyone's arm just because it was Sunday afternoon and there wasn't anything good on the telly. And one was a woman, too, only not riding around on the back of someone's bike, but actually allowed one of her own, like she had any right to it. "You're Hell's Angels, then?" asked Big Ted sarcastically. If there was one thing real Hell's Angels can't abide, it's weekend bikers. There are a number of other things real Hell's Angels can't abide. These include the police soap Ford Cortinias, and in Big Ted's case, anchovies and olives. The four strangers nodded. "What chapter are you from, then?" The tall stranger looked at Big Ted. Then he stood up. It was a complicated motion. If the shores of the seas of night had deck chairs, they'd open up something like that. He seemed to be unfolding himself forever. He wore a dark helmet completely hiding his features. It was made of that weird plastic Big Ted noticed. Like, you looked in it and all you could see was your own face. "Revelations," he said. "Chapter 6. Verses 2 to 8, added the boy in white helpfully. Big Ted glared at the four of them. His lower jaw began to protrude, and a little blue vein in his temple started to throb. "What's that mean, then?" he demanded. There was a tug at his sleeve. It was Pig Bog. He had done a peculiar shade of gray under the dirt. "It means we're in trouble," said Pig Bog. And then the tall stranger reached up a pale motorbike gauntlet, raised the visor of his helmet, and Big Ted found himself wishing for the first time in his existence that he'd lived a better life. "Jesus Christ!" he moaned. I think he may be along in a minute," said Ping Pong Bog urgently. "He's probably looking for somewhere to park his bike. Let's go and join a youth club or something." But Big Ted's invincible ignorance was his shield and armor. He didn't move. "Core," he said. "Hell's Angels." War flipped him a lazy salute. "That's us, Big Ted," she said. "The real McCoy." Feynman nodded. "The old firm," he said. Pollution removed his helmet and shook out his long white hair. He had taken over when Pestilence, muttering about penicillin, had retired in 1936. If the old boy had known what opportunities the future had held. "Others promise," he said. "We deliver." Big Ted looked at the fourth horseman. I seen you before," he said. "You was on the cover of that Blue Oyster Cult album, and I got a ring with your head on it." "I get everywhere." "Core," Big Ted's face screwed up with an effort of thought. "What kind of bike you ridin'?" he said.